guys, what is going on? Redmaster here, and welcome to the April-May 2018 edition of Meta Monthly, where as always we'll be taking a look at some of the more competitive decks of Cards and Castles and see why they're strong and maybe point out some of their weaknesses. But before we go, get started with that, I do want to sort of, kind of give myself sort of a little welcome back here. I will be posting more frequently, hopefully. Things have settled down on my end. So I'm excited to be making more CNC content and some other content like you've already seen before. We've got some Uno gameplay creeping in there and some other live streams that hopefully you guys enjoy. But without, further advertising my channel, let's get started in this edition of Meta Monthly. Now the first deck we're taking a look at is the green-yellow. I want to say it's somewhat greedish, somewhat good set depending on maybe what variant you guys find along the way. But certainly green-yellow is still in the meta. It's actually quite lower than what we, originally reported on last time we did a Meta Monthly. I think it's decreased quite a lot, and I'll kind of explain why as we go further on. But they are still making, splashes in the meta here and there. I wouldn't say they're completely dead. Of course, power coming from the nasty draw you get from any sort of greed, plus School of Knowledge to fill your hand up and eventually overpower your opponent with cards like T-Rex, Arbiter's Return, Craxus, Robin for extra gold, and then sprinkle in the armories and blacksmiths in there to make your weaker tier units that much stronger, and really just create this sort of control, aggression, I just leave it all out there on the board, and now you have to deal with it kind of deck. Now, its weaknesses, of course, really you do have to hit these buildings pretty quickly if you guys want to take them down. I would say, hitting School of Knowledge or Merchant Estate is going to be a big blow to these decks because they need that to facilitate more draw, and if they happen to use a lot of gold or perhaps gain a lot of gold with investment over, a previous turn, you essentially neutralize that buff of gold if you take away their draw with them having, maybe not the ideal resources to use that gold on. Of course, there's no guarantee that that is going to stop them. Of course, they do have usually 3 School of Knowledge in their deck, so of course they're just going to cycle through for another one. And with cheap draws like Lumberjack and books out there, it's more than likely that they will get some sort of additional draw to find another School of Knowledge. Although, like I did say before, this deck is on the decline, so I wouldn't say it's a huge worry. I still think its potential is pretty strong out there, especially with what is currently at the top. But overall, not a dead deck, and one that I do still recommend to players who are looking for a deck that, wants to. Well, that's sort of the wrong way to say it. It's still a color choice that I would take. Because the things that it can do are still pretty strong. And with what's out there currently, you might find some luck with it. I know right now the top of this leaderboard, or the top of the meta, if we want to call it, is a bit wonky right now, in my opinion. So I think you can get away with a deck like this and certainly make it into probably 28, 29. 30 might be a push. You might have to put some extra work into that. But I definitely think, 28, 29, that this deck can still fairly get up there. Especially, again, like I said, with all the other things out there. So, with that being said, not really much to talk about with this deck. I didn't mention more in detail, of course, on the latter one. I do want to get into more of the current decks, because I feel like those deserve much, a much bigger portion of this video dedicated to, I should say, because they are, again, very wonky and interesting to talk about. So with that being said, let's move on to deck number 2 for this edition of Meta Monthly. And taking our number 2 slot is actually going to be red-yellow. Now, I currently have my None-Dead deck here as sort of the showcase for red-yellow. Undead in these colors have certainly been prevalent, especially with Eternal Darkness working as a nasty spawn block still. But also I've seen people run what I will, sort of call a night deck. In red-yellow, this is sort of what I would take. Technically, this is just sort of a mess around with Pacifism and Primordial Flame. Some of you have already seen this deck in action. But it's somewhat similar, I would say, to a night deck running around. But the point is, red-yellow is starting to re-emerge as a top-tier color. It did, in the early days of the Enchanted Grove, peak very highly due to the fact that you have everything in these colors. Burn, you've got heal, you've got strong units, AoE damage with Luminaris. You just have a lot of things. Draw from the Crusaders. I almost forgot to mention draw. Draw, very important. Um, but yeah, a lot of elements that really work well in a competitive deck, which is why decks in these colors tend to do much higher. I would say that their weakness is, pretty much that early game. Getting started is difficult for them since they might be relying on, a one card play each turn in these beginning stages. So if you have like maybe a red yellow, not red yellow, a blue red aggression deck or a red white aggression deck, you might be able to push through before this deck really takes off, I would say. It might be a bit difficult seeing as how some of these knights are a bit bulkier in health. Of course, Questing Knight, Dwarf Paladin, and Knight of Flowers all rocking the 3G health. What's Earth Knight at? 2-2? Okay, well, that's not as bad as Questing Knight, but still, with that shield, it's technically like a 2-3, or the armor, I should say. And with Undead, you still have a lot of problems in that. The Unholy Altar creating those 2-2 bodies, and then easily buffing that with Blacksmith or Armory in the following turns. The draw from Grotesque and the Crusader cards all around. And then you have the Fear of Rakanoth, Necromancer, Arbiter, all in the later game stages. In Knights, I think they're somewhat similar. They, of course, are not running Rakanoth, though. They're usually going to have a Joan-Viev or a Swordsman in place of that Rakanoth. And, of course, Luminaris, Arbiter's Return, things that I've already mentioned that are just very, very strong in this competitive scene right now. I will say that I do think it's a bit unusual for them to be climbing back up. I mean, I guess I'm not totally surprised. I figured that some of the colors might reemerge as time moved on, and we can clearly see that with the red-yellow. They did drop off for a point, but now you can see they're slowly starting to reemerge back, and they play pretty well against what's currently sitting at number one. So I guess that's why people are running them. It's sort of the or the direct answer to what is at the number one spot, the direct answer to that deck. Again, which is a weird one, but we'll get more into that as we get further along. Not really much to talk about else. There's not much else to talk about. That's the way it goes in terms of these decks. Just a lot of strong elements working together, like any good deck does. Each with their own sort of respective devastating blows. Zombie hordes in the undead side, Luminaris and Stronger Knights on the knight side. So you kind of get this weird mix of two decks really taking up the same spot, but utilizing the same colors to create this one deck group, if you will. But with that being said, I think we've touched up upon that pretty well. Again, not much really else to show you guys. Again, if you want deck lists, I'm kind of just scrolling through them. Oh, that's not the right one. Just scrolling through them one last final time. So, of course, take your pauses and whatnot. But with that being said, I think we're going to move on and see what the number one deck of this season currently is. Well, truth be told, the deck that I didn't mention is at number one isn't really a deck. It's more like a single card of a faction. And I'm talking about the Arcanon Magic Eater. Now, this bearded boy has been causing quite the devastating maneuvers on the ladder currently, whether that be in the probably most popular blue-purple or in the lesser purple-red. Or I think there was something else running around that I can't remember. Let me just look back at the TV because there's a bunch of oh yeah, the green purple. Regardless of what color the ninja is being run with, you're more than likely going to see ninjas, specifically the Magic Eater, running around. Now, the last time we talked about sort of these colors, they were referencing trap decks. And now, while trap decks have seen the decline, they do play a supportive role with the Magic Eater. But I wouldn't call these, newer purple decks necessarily trap decks. They do run trap support, some of them, yes, but they're not totally dedicated to that trap cycle. They use it more in a supportive role, like I mentioned, rather than their win condition. But their win condition is probably going to be the Magic Eater, or at least something relating to it. Whether that be him equipped with a certain spell or whatnot, or maybe the units that they tend to support Magic Eater with, they get those buffs and they become the win conditions. Regardless, Ninja slash Viking, Pirate, or Warlock, I mean, Warlock being the lesser of the three, I would say that's probably not. I don't know, maybe even want to include red, because just I don't really see it that much. But when you're talking about purple, green purple and blue purple, definitely um, decks that are probably the top tier right now. And unfortunately, I don't really have an example for you. I've been out of the loop a little bit, so um, I haven't really been keeping up on the that type specifically. They've only started to appear more recently, I think, within the past week or two, if memory serves me correctly. But they have made quite the impact, shaking up things a lot. Hence why we don't really see much of green blue anymore. The Magic Eater decks completely outpaced that. Uh, and I would argue they somewhat do to the green yellows as well, which is why you don't see a lot of them anymore. Just the quick action of Magic Eater, and he's got fast too, so we could zip around, take out a building, give Rampage on this sucker, and he can just go zipping around. Even though that's really a Druid thing, you guys get my point of how deadly Magic Eater can be. Well, multi-strike actually, it's sort of like the Rampage of ninjas. So pair that. That's actually a perfect curve. 3 Magic Eater into 4. Uh, what's it called? Multi-strike. Multi-strike's a spell. Creates a 4/4 Magic Eater with fast, and whatever spells your opponent could have used before. So that can create quite the devastating boy. Now, in terms of weaknesses, of course, I would say hitting the Magic Eater is going to be very important to crippling these types of decks. Of course, they're not going to all solely rely on it. They might have other winning conditions in there, or they might switch their traps as sort of a more effective win condition. But for these decks, I would say really utilize Warlock Burn or direct damage in general. It's what's going to get them hurt the most. And if you can avoid spells while Magic Eater is out, do try to do so unless you can kill it, like say a Defective Flame can on the Magic Eater as soon as he comes out. I would say the Warlocks are probably going to be the Ninja's biggest sort of threat. And the reason why they're sort of, not dominating right now. The inclusion of red yellow in this meta, like I said, it is somewhat countering these ninja decks. They're having their resources taken away via direct damage, so now they're stuck sort of figuring out what to do. Meanwhile, the enemy knows already what their next plan is, because all they have to do is just zap away the Magic Eater, and now they can go back to playing as normal. So, yeah, definitely ninja decks. More specifically, this bearded boy, I would say, is what I classify to be this season's sort of top deck. I wouldn't say that it's a dominating deck, like I mentioned. It's being controlled pretty well, but that does leave me to worry about the Mystic Jojo again and the traps role in these decks. Like I said, I haven't really seen a lot of them rely solely on the traps, but I could have just watched some other games that didn't really rely too heavily on the dojo. Um, Again, it's up to your interpretation on that one. I think if anything's going to happen soon, which it will, in terms of a patch or new update, I do believe that they're working on something. But regardless, the dojo is probably going to be one of their targets that they've got to hit due to what it can do in supporting of these decks, the crazy double draws and whatnot. They're still prevalent, but not as prevalent as probably what they used to be when this card was first sort of open to the public in terms of what it can do. Of course, that's not to say that traps aren't dead. They certainly aren't. You might have a few decks running around that rely on traps, but overall, I would say the presence of traps as a whole has probably decreased just a little bit. They again more of a supportive role than a dominating role. The deck focuses more on that bearded boy rather than the dojo. But overall, that's the reason I think these ninja decks are probably where they're at right now. But again, being controlled pretty well, and I think that's good. Always good to have some sort of control over a top deck. With that being said, guys, that's going to do it for this edition of Meta Monthly. I know it's sort of been a shorter video than what you guys were, or maybe used to when you view a Meta Monthly video. But truth be told, I have been out of the loop a little bit. Some things, of course, had to take priority, so I haven't really been paying all that much attention to the current meta. But based upon what I see on the TV and in some gameplay well, not gameplay, but sort of what I'm hearing over in Discord, plus some cards TV, I think this is a pretty good guesstimation of what the current meta is. If you guys did enjoy, please let me know by leaving a like on the video, sharing it with your friends, and comment down below your thoughts on this season's meta. If you guys like it, dislike it, or maybe want to question what I chose as sort of my meta decks, do leave any sort of thoughts like that again in the comment section below. And if you guys want to help the channel, help it grow, all you have to do is just click that subscribe button at no additional cost to you. Subscribe button. So, with that being said, I have been out of the loop for a while. But until next time, guys, stay gaming.